for checking in and coming back for another episode of Learning Quick. I'm super excited about this one because this is a framework that I've seen more and more people talk about, and I've seen you post about a lot myself. And so to get you on here to be able to talk about that is super, super exciting. So anyway, thanks for coming. Welcome. And do you want to give a little bit of intro to who you are? And I guess we'll dive into all the Blitz.js things in a little bit, but.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. So I'm Brandon and creator of Blitz. I've been doing full stack software development for quite a few years, and I've been consulting specifically like an independent freelancer for about 3 years. And so I've done Ruby on Rails apps. I've done React apps, Nexjs. I've done a lot of GraphQL stuff like Hasura. And I've done mobile apps with React Native, but I just decided that full stack, like building a full stack React app today is just like too hard. There's just too many pieces, and it's just so much more. I had this tension between like Ruby on Rails is so nice because it's a monolith. There's no API. It's just you're just developing your stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm slow with it now because I'm used to building UIs with React, and now I go to Rails and it's like, what do I even do with this template thing? Like, how do I like use a button or something? But so I wanted that same experience of like the no API thing, but using React all the way and JavaScript and all of that. And so I decided that like back in February that like we kind of have all the pieces that we need now. We have Prisma 2, which is really awesome for the database access. We have Nexjs, which is awesome runtime for client-side rendering, server-side rendering, static page generation. React Query for managing network requests and server cache, and just taking all these things and putting them together and making this new Rails-like framework. And so here we are.
Yeah.
6 months later.
Yeah, it seems like I've been really into like serverless functions recently, and I've just gotten into, so I was doing that kind of like in Netlify, using Netlify functions and just pairing that with regular React or maybe Gatsby. And I recently just kind of but recently started looking into and actually trying to use Nexjs, and I really enjoyed that, of just having like the API stuff, the serverless functions kind of built in, and it all works together, and you get the mix of static pages and server-side render pages, and then anything you want to do on the front end with regular React, you can do as well. So I thought that was super cool. But the idea for a lot of people, and it sounds like for you too, is like there's so many different potential options. It's like somebody just like package these things together and let me go off and get started building my app. And it sounds like that's kind of the space that like you're really trying to solve.
Yeah, for sure.
Sweet. So a couple shout outs for some follows in here. Databrect, how are you not already following? You've been in like every stream for the last couple of weeks. And then More Spurs, thanks for the follow. So thanks everybody for being here and hanging out. We got a comment on actually a question from More Spurs, and I think you kind of touched on this, but if you want to answer this as well. So talking about an intro to Blitz.js, and the question is why yet another framework? Because this is one of those things where we just talked about, like there's lots of options, which is the reason you built this, is to put those together into like a kind of a package thing where you got it all right here. But then it is like another option that we as developers potentially have to learn and kind of get used to. So yeah, if you have anything to elaborate on for that, or like why you decided it was worth it still to make another library framework.
Sure. So the main thing is there hasn't existed a true full stack React framework. Nextjs is sort of full stack, but it's pretty minimal. If you're trying to build like an entire like SaaS application or something, that like there's so much that Next is very bare bones if you approach it from that perspective. And we haven't had that. We've had an older class of JavaScript frameworks like Sales, Meteor,
yeah,
those type of things. But they all started out with server-side template rendering, and now some of them have moved on to be more like API only and front end agnostic. And so then you're still left with how do you deal
The
with the
front
front
end
end?
piece, yeah.
Um, yeah, there's a Vulkan, which is
Hmm.
I think they're just now converting to use Nexjs as their base, where before I think it was server-side templates, and so
Okay.
that's an interesting switch. Um, so I think that's the main thing is like full stack React. We haven't had a good solution for that until now.
Yeah, and that's what like just the idea of building a startup or a product of some sort. Like you don't have to be the only one. You just have to like fill that niche or that void that people have. So you're not the only framework, right? But that
Right.
that gap that you had and that I've certainly experienced, and I think you pretty directly kind of compare yourself to Ruby on Rails, or at least on the site inspired by Ruby on Rails. And I am not a Ruby developer. I've done some Ruby on Rails. Ruby never clicked with me as a language, but Ruby on Rails as a framework, I was like mind blown. I was like, yeah, I don't ever want to write any of that boilerplate code again. Just like give it to me and let me run and do what I'm doing. Have you
Yeah.
do you talk much about Redwood.js and how that compares? Because like I think they're less like wording wise comparing themselves to Ruby on Rails, but there certainly are a lot of similarities. So if you do you have
Sure.
any thoughts on like how those two things differ?
Yeah. So we're both Redwood and Blitz are solving the same problem with different approaches.
Hmm.
Like we're both going for that full stack JavaScript, React, um, batteries included framework that makes you really productive. Redwood's approach is that you should have GraphQL API in the mix,
Mm.
and so they're going from that assumption. We have GraphQL API. How can we make that experience as nice as possible? But um, with Blitz, I instead of trying to make GraphQL or REST like as nice as possible, decided to totally eliminate that entire portion of your app. So it's actually still there. The API is there, but we abstract it away into
Hmm.
a compile step. And so when you're building your app, you don't have to think about building an API or fetching from your API. Um, the developer experience is that you write functions that run on the server and you import those functions directly into your front end components and call them like just a direct function call. And then at build time, we swap that function import out with a HTTP
Hmm.
network request. And so it's super productive because you don't have to write a GraphQL schema. You don't have to write GraphQL. Well, you're still writing resolvers, um, but you don't have to write like a GraphQL query string on the client.
Yeah.
Um, and then lastly, using TypeScript, you don't have to have a separate code generation process that's always running to recompile all the types for all of your queries and your schemas. Because in Blitz, since you're just directly importing the function, like the types are there statically, just like if you import a function from a different file, like you don't have to compile the types for that, it's just there. And so you have that same experience with the Blitz. So it's kind of mind blowing whenever you like use it and you're like, just write this function on the server, import it in the client, and it's even still me is like, what else do I need to do?
And I'm still trying to figure out in my head like how all of that magic works. But I think, and we'll see this in a second because we'll get like hands on and kind of walk through like the Hello World demo. But I was watching, I'll give this to in the chat for people that are curious too. The video that you did, the recording, this is from React Europe. And you went through and did some of the stuff that we'll do, or I guess really all the stuff that we'll do today hands on. And that exact thing that you said of like, you call a function on the front end and somehow the magic is like translating that to an actual HTTP request is really crazy cool and like just so much easier from a development standpoint. Like again, understanding that like there's things that go on behind the scenes that I don't know, but as a developer, I just go and write. And More
Yeah,
Spurs had another question about can you build with Blitz.js, can you build components and call APIs too? And I think the answer to that is yes, but the idea of like calling an API now is a little bit different because for the most part, you're calling a function and you take care of the behind the scenes of like actually translating that to an API request.
yeah, exactly. So one thing when I very first put out the very first tweet, it said, "Hey, I'm building a Ruby on Rails replacement
Mm-hmm.
for React." At that time, I had just like a 300 line prototype that I threw together in one weekend, and it was SSR only.
Hmm.
And so it did not have any API request in there. It was using Nexjs, get server-side props. And so some people are think that Blitz is SSR only because of that, but now it's not. Um, as I was iterating and talk with other collaborators that have like joined in, we are trying to figure out like what's the best way, the best type of architecture. Like, is it similar to Ruby on Rails where you have a model view controller? Is it something totally different? And then somehow, one day I was just thinking like, okay, what is like, if this was easy, what would it look like? And like, well, you just import a server function into your front end to use it. And I was like, well, that's a good idea. Let's see if we can make that work.
I love that's a good idea. Let's see if we can make it work now. That's really cool. So we got a question from, well, a couple shout outs here. Namesville and Shadows Emperor, thanks for the follow. And Namesville actually came in with a question of why or why not should one use ROR, which is I guess Ruby on Rails versus Blitz. I would imagine the main thing is like you're a React / JavaScript developer and you want to stay in like the ecosystem that you're most familiar with.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to be better than Ruby on Rails. And like
Shots
more feature.
fired.
Well, I don't know if you can be more feature complete.
Yeah.
But definitely want to be like on par with all the things that you get with Ruby on Rails, like queues and all that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The main thing is, do you like Ruby or do you like JavaScript?
Yeah. And there's something to be said for why JavaScript as a language makes more sense. Like if you look at people that are going through boot camps, for example, like a lot of people are doing JavaScript and less people like boot camps do Ruby on Rails, but a lot less that I hear of are doing Ruby on Rails. And same thing for like curriculum in general and the content that you find on YouTube. Like you're just more likely to find more JavaScript content. So lots of people are getting their start with JavaScript. And once you get started there, like if you have the tools to do what you want, then there's no reason to switch over to another language or another framework.
Yep.
More Spurs had a question. Do you use Webpack to deploy and how do you test? I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure how the Webpack would relate to deploying unless it's just talking about like bundling. And then the second part of that is how do you test? And I think you either have some testing stuff built in now or that's in the works.
So yeah, we're built on top of Nexjs, which internally uses Webpack. So there is Webpack in the mix, and you can customize the Webpack config if you need. How do you test? So new apps are set up with Jest and React testing library by default, and then probably we'll be adding Cypress end-to-end test in there by default too. But yeah, you can test it like any normal JavaScript or React project.
And that is testing is one of my big like weaknesses of really knowing. Like I've done some automated testing in the past. I just have done very little, and it's also been a while. So I've got like that's on my like to-do list this year to spend some time like just leaning more into testing and adding it to some of the like side projects that I have to get more experience.
Yeah.
It's one of those underrated aspects of development. Like it gets skipped in so many of those like tutorials and courses that you take, but then it's such a helpful thing to have when you actually get to like building production stuff that you want to make sure is running well before you actually ship it.
Yep. And in React apps, I write almost no React test. Like I don't test any individual components or pages, but I mostly just use Cypress in the end-to-end, true end-to-end test in the browser. So you're testing it just like the user is, and that's like the biggest bang for your buck that you can get. And I'll use Jest for testing business logic things, like various functions and things I need to test. But actually testing the UI, like most of what I do, like there's not that much complex UI that needs test. It's like you're gonna notice if it's broken type of thing.
Yeah.
The main thing is the end-to-end. Like, can I log in? Can I buy something?
The whole thing work, yeah. Yeah, and there's lots of people who have like pretty strong opinions on which kind of testing makes the most sense. Like a lot of people think end-to-end testing, like if you do good end-to-end testing, you're less than a need to have like individual unit tests, for example. And then vice versa. Like people say, if like all your unit tests work, then why do I need to put it all together? But I think you should still put it all together. But like people get pretty adamant about like their beliefs in testing. But all in all, you probably want something in your applications if you're shipping stuff to production.
Yeah.
Another.
And then TypeScript.
Yeah.
TypeScript really helps with reduces the need for unit test in a lot of cases
True.
because your types are solve some of those same problems.
Yeah. And I haven't. So I did Angular work at my last, like when I was doing full-time development, and using TypeScript there was nice. Although we a lot of times didn't even take advantage of TypeScript. It was just like we just wrote regular JavaScript and like kind of missed out on some of the things that it would catch, for example. But once you get into that rhythm, I think once you like go down the TypeScript path, you get comfortable setting it up, you get comfortable working with TypeScript. I think it's super, super useful. And it just like JavaScript by itself is just kind of a free for all, right? Like you kind of do whatever and hope it works, versus TypeScript, you have a much better idea that you know things work before you actually like finish writing the code.
Yep.
Question in the chat: How long did it take to come up with Blitz, and where did you get the inspiration? I think you've kind of covered like the inspiration of like there was just a gap and you wanted something that would do X, and so that's why you built it. And then you mentioned like you started off with a prototype that was in like a weekend or something, and then you just built on it from there.
Yeah, basically.
So that's how long it took. But it's been, so you started, I think in the video
February.
you said February. Okay, you said it had been a few months in May in that video.
It's about 6 months or so.
Cool. And how many people are, so you're working on it more or less full time, you're doing consulting as well, and then how many other people are working on it, to what extent?
Well, we've had over 100 other people contribute in some form or fashion, and there's about a handful of people that are actively contributing, and sometimes they're kind of rotating out slowly. But there's about a handful of people that have been here ever since the very beginning, and that have been pretty influential. Rudy Yardley is on the core team. He did a lot of the compilation step stuff. Dylan is part of the core team, has been really helpful in a number of different things. And Adam Markov has like done all of the CLI stuff in the code generation and our templates, and so super big shout out to him for all of that.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah,
And then
oh, go ahead.
well, a couple more people I got to mention while
Yeah.
I'm here is Christina, our designer, who's designed the logo for free and
Cool.
is finishing up a full website design right now. Because what we have now is just me throwing something up there, but we have a full website design coming. And then her boyfriend has helped manage a lot of the website issues too. So.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think the website looks great now. Like it's nice and clean and simple. It does exactly what it needs to do. So I think it looks good.
Cool.
So so Kariak is in the chat. Who is Robert? Is that one of the people?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sorry, Robert. Your name flipped me for a minute there.
See, so for what it's worth, this is like one of my worst fears in streaming, is like mispronouncing someone's name or saying the wrong name. Like I hate the pressure of that, or forgetting to mention someone. So anyway, like I understand.
Yeah.
So welcome Robert, and +1 to Christina being awesome. I'm going to switch over to, while we have another question I think that we can answer, I'm going to switch over and show everyone my screen. If someone can run the Blitz command in the chat, you'll get a link to Blitz.js.com. It's not hard to remember. You can also see it on your screen in the Twitch chat. But if I set up this command, so someone should use it, so it'll make me feel like I did a good job setting it up. And there we go. Thank you, Arpan. So this is the website that we were talking about, or that you were talking about for Blitz. And I think what I would like to do is let you answer one more question, and then we'll just dive in and actually do the hands-on piece of this, which I'm like really excited about. And so the question here from Databrecht is: Are you afraid about the heavy tie with React in case it may lose popularity over time? It's an interesting question, and I think it's in some capacity, like you kind of have to pick something, right? Like if you were to build this thing, you have to pick a framework, and React to me certainly seems like the one that makes the most sense right now. So I don't know if you have any additional
Yep.
thoughts on that.
Yeah. Like, um, are you afraid? No, I'm not afraid about it. You just got to do what makes sense today, and then just go with what you have. And like at some point down the future, yeah, something else will probably come up, just like Blitz is here now versus Ruby on Rails. And
Yep.
at some point, something else is going to come along and be like, oh, we're better than Blitz. So
Yeah, I mean that's
hopefully
kind
not,
of
but hopefully it's not for a long time.
right. Yeah, it's not next month or anything. But that's just kind of the nature of it's the nature of web development. It's the nature of programming. Like things change and people adapt. But I would say, like from my perspective, React is so popular right now. There's so many things that are getting built on top of it. It seems like a good bet. It's going to be a long time, if ever, that it just goes away. And you'll have the
Yeah.
ability to adapt as well. Like as new features or requests and things come in, like you can tie those into Blitz and still be up to date with like
Yep.
what other people in the community are looking for.
Yeah. And just like today, there's still a lot of people using Ruby on Rails and people who love it,
Sure.
and
Yep.
people are building new apps with it. And so Ruby on Rails is going to exist for a long time. And so
Yep.
probably Blitz will too.
I think that's one of the things that we forget is how many websites are built with Ruby on Rails, how many websites are built with like a PHP backend, how many websites are still built with jQuery. Like even though we don't associate those with like the new hot modern stuff that we're like building
Yep.
our new startups out of, like those are things that companies still like their products are run on those technologies. And even though we may not think about it, it still exists, and those things will continue to exist for them for a long time.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, cool. So I think everybody can see my screen, and I have run this before. You can see I deleted the file, and this is my delete me directory. People have commented on this. I got this idea from Wes Boss a while ago, and it's just to have a directory of like samples and things that I build that are deletable at any point. So if I like need to clear up some space on my computer with node modules and all that kind of stuff, I can just wipe out the delete me folder and be good to go. I also have like a folder for things that I actually want to save and care about. But for this is just a quick demo that we'll use. I've got Blitz installed globally, so you could do npm IG and just Blitz like that, and that will install the CLI. And then from there, Blitz new my Blitz app. And this is, I mean, pretty similar to what you would do with like create Next app or create React app. Like this is going to create boilerplate files and configurations and things. You want to talk a little bit about like what's baked into that when it creates all those files?
Sure. So um, so I guess the contrast with Next.js, if you create a Next.js app, it's like the most minimal application that you can possibly have. And so there's only like one or two files in there. So it looks
Mm-hmm.
amazing. It's like, oh, this is so simple. Um, but then there's like about at least 5 other files that almost every single app is going to need, like
Yeah.
underscore app.ts underscore document.tsx. And so we take all of those files that you're probably going to need and put them in there by default. That way, when you need it, you don't have to go look up the docs and copy and paste it. It's already there for you. So that we have that set up. We have a Prisma 2 set up in here with a database schema and Prisma for the database client. We have a form library. So you saw the prompt that you can choose one of the top form libraries. It will set that up for you by default. We add ESLint Husky Git hooks so that it'll format your code whenever you commit, and
Hmm.
it'll run the linter and test whenever you push. And
Sweet.
it has just test set up by default. And then the biggest one is it has user login or sign up, login, and logout set up by default. So as soon as this finishes, you can just go to the page, sign up, and you can log it right in, and your task
Good
for
to
the
go.
week is done.
Yeah. Yeah. Build me an application that has authentication in it and have it ready in a month. Okay. And
Yeah,
you can see like there's a ton of files in here. You've got like some starting pages that are also, I guess, just the index probably, but you've got a test file associated with that. So you talked about like having some of that stuff built in, some different configuration stuff in here, database stuff, and what kind of, and I like, this is an interesting question for me because I don't have necessarily any database stuff installed on my machine. But what database is this set up with to start?
Um, it's by default it's SQLite, and because pretty much every machine has that,
Hmm.
and you can easily switch to Postgres, which I would recommend for any production application, and then you can use Postgres like when you actually deploy it too.
Okay, sweet. Um, I think my I don't know if my video is coming out slow on the stream, but it looks like it's kind of slowing down in Discord, which hopefully is not too bad coming out on the stream. So let me know if it's a problem in there. Um, but yeah, so I didn't even have to think about the database stuff. Like as soon as I created the app and then started it, it was able to do CRUD operations and kind of good to go. After I did the initial command of like setting up the project, I don't even know what project model is that the general term for it, and then all the scaffolding stuff that comes along with it.
I guess.
Whatever the scaffolding stuff does, whatever you call that generic thing, that's what I created, and
Yeah.
then all that stuff is ready to go. So you do
Yep.
have a question in the chat of like, where did the name come from for Blitz?
Um, I don't know exactly how I came up with it, but it does mean lightning in German,
Hmm.
which is like it's fast, productive, and then it was also kind of a nod to Zeit. Vercel used to be called Zeit, and Zeit is German for time, and
Oh, I didn't know
so
that.
and then Prisma is like from a prism, which is also light, and so there's kind of
Hmm.
an ode to both Zeit formerly and Prisma.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm gonna open this project up in VS Code. Another question here from Todd Libby, who does a lot with accessibility. Um, asks, are you addressing accessibility? And if so, like what kind of things are built in, if any, into Blitz?
Currently, we don't have any special accessibility stuff in Blitz, so it's just you do all your normal React stuff. Um, I'm not aware currently of anything that we could do in Blitz to improve that. I guess one thing we have ESLint set up with
Mm-hmm.
like your accessibility lint rules. We have that set up by default. Um, but I'm definitely welcome to suggestions and ideas of things that we can do there.
Good point. Yeah, I think a lot of like the ESLint stuff is just super powerful by itself because it like throws warnings or errors depending on the configuration, and that at least raises awareness to the developer of things to make sure that they're taken into account that they may not have.
Yeah.
Um, cool. I've got this installed, and I think this app created. So I'll just start it off with Blitz start and using alpha software. And you mentioned, or before we actually joined on the stream, so your goal is to have a V1 ready by the end of the calendar year, right? So by the end of December.
Correct.
Sweet.
Correct.
Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong directory here. My Blitz app, and now we'll see if that works. So Blitz start. And we also talked about this beforehand. Like one of my questions was like, when would you really push people to say like, hey, this is the thing you should be using for production? I assume like you'd be pretty confident by the time you did a 1.0 release, but you also said that you're doing some like client stuff right now with Blitz that is like a production application, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think there's at least 5 production applications running right now that's built in Blitz. And then I started a production Blitz application last week for a client and another one this week for a different client. Um,
Sweet.
so it's definitely like, there's still some things we're probably going to change. Nothing too major. So it's still like alpha as in that, there's still some bugs and some rough edges, but it does work great and
Yeah.
people are loving it. So we're hoping to get to beta status within like a month or two probably. and then be in beta for about a month maybe, and then we can market it as 1.0.
Cool. That's super exciting. And I bet it's got to be like, it's got to feel great to have built a production application with your own product, especially if like the
Yeah,
end
it's
result of
fun.
that is like, it's so much easier for you than it would have been had you not had this, which is like the exact problem that you're trying to solve.
Exactly.
Cool. More Spurs asked about. Looks like this comes set up with routing too, and this is built on top of Nexjs, which Nexjs does routing just based on like your folder structure. So it just uses the same stuff that Nexjs does.
Correct.
Cool.
Yes. Probably at some point we'll add a config-based routing file, which Next.js doesn't support, but we can add that to Blitz
Hmm.
so that you can define all your routes in a single file and like import your components to there or whatever, and then we can generate all the actual routes for you. Um, but
Hmm.
not
Okay.
not yet.
Yeah. Is that what would be the benefit of that? Is that just for like giving people the flexibility to kind of organize their code how they want?
Yeah, it's mainly preference. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. And I think just streaming stuff, I've got a lot going on here. So if it looked like it took a long time to install or start up Blitz, that was made much worse by my computer being slow. So I did this earlier and it ran much faster. So don't think that that is a bad sign for Blitz. Just think of that as blaming my computer for being slower right now. Um, so this is the landing page here. I think this is like the same. This is the same like next icon here that Next gives you to show like the difference in I don't actually know. Does it show like the difference between like static pages and server side render pages?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can see that's a pre-rendered page.
Yeah.
And so by default, every page has has a pre-rendered like loading screen, and then that loading screen is static and it can be uploaded to a CDN, and so it can be much faster. Um, but yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. And so you're
So probably
saying,
you can go ahead and
oh, I think that's what I was. Were you gonna say login?
yeah, you can sign up. You'll have to sign up first.
Oh, right. That makes sense. So let's sign up. And that is not a valid email. Let's do my me at jamesqquick.com and should be at least 10 characters. Nice. Gosh, what is a password that is 10 characters? I think this is one of my longer passwords.
A B C D E F G.
All the way up to 10. Yeah. Cool. So this is telling me like I've got user role set up. So it just gets a default role of user. And I assume you could go in and do admin and super admin and super admin
Correct.
and all that kind of stuff if you wanted to. But to be able to like this is cool, but to be able to take advantage of like CRUD for something, you basically just run this blitz generate command, and that will generate a model called project. In this case, you're just telling it has one property of string, and it will do lots of things behind the scenes. So I'm going to run this command, and you want to talk about all the different things that it will
Sure.
um, do behind the
So
scenes.
the first thing is gonna add a model to your Prisma schema. And by default, you already have a user model and a session model so that the authentication works. So here you're adding a project model to your database schema, and then it's going to create the queries and mutations. Now, these are not GraphQL queries and mutations. They're just using the same name. But those are like how you, like in Ruby on Rails, you write controllers. In Blitz, you write queries and mutations. So they're more like resolvers. And then it creates the pages, the four default pages for CRUD, which is create, read, update, delete. Actually, there's five because you have read one and then
And then
read
read all.
the list, the
Yeah.
index page.
And we can see that if, so I guess it's probably in app and then pages. Is this VS Code?
So so one thing that's different in Blitz, the Next.js is you can have multiple pages folders. And
Okay.
so the pages for projects is under projects. And so you can
Under,
organize your pages. So
okay.
it's a lot more scalable for once you get, tons of code. Because then like you can have an entire team that's responsible for like all the project code, and all the files that they need access to is all in one place versus scattered all the way throughout the app.
Okay. Very interesting. Cool. And with that, so inside of this projects directory, there's this is a Next.js syntax. So this is like where you define these brackets. This is basically saying like that's going to be a route parameter. So this is going to be slash
Correct.
projects slash project ID. And this will be the thing that we'll come back to this in a second, but calls this get project function, which is a function from your server, which does the magic translation behind the scenes. So we'll come back to that in a second. And then in that, you can also have nested routes where you have like slash project slash ID slash, and then your edit one here. And then you've got the index and then a new one also.
Correct.
So that is the pages. And then inside of queries, or where is it? Oh, I'm looking for the model first. So where is the schema?
It's under the top level DB folder.
And then schema.prisma. Cool. So
Yeah.
here is, and you mentioned there were two existing models. So there's user and then session. And then now here's our project. And this is so cool. Like I don't want to have to write this stuff over and over again. So to have like something scaffold all this stuff out for me has always been like, I've always been a huge fan of that. So I love it.
Yeah.
And
While we're here, the
yeah.
question from Databrick: how hard is it to use database that does not have a Prisma adapter yet? Not hard at all. It's super easy. Blitz is database agnostic, so you can use anything you want. You can use Mongo. You can use like Next or any other Node.js database client or query builder. So in your go to in one of the queries or mutations, you just import the database client and use it just like you do normally on the server. And so you would do the same thing. You would just import your other database client, some non-Prisma thing, and then use it.
Okay. So that, yeah, you just use it. Like if you use a Mongoose client for Mongo, you just use that right here and import it the same way you would in a
Correct.
regular Express app.
Yep.
Cool. And I don't know the idea of Prisma that well, honestly. And you mentioned, I think in one of your videos, that Prisma is not just limited to providing a GraphQL layer on top of things. Do you mind, like, and this is for my benefit too, just kind of talking about what Prisma is at a higher level?
Sure. Yeah. So Prisma is definitely confusing for a lot of people because Prisma used to be a GraphQL thing, but now it has nothing to do with GraphQL, and
Okay.
it's totally different. So now it is a database client. That's all it is. Nothing to do with GraphQL. It's just a database client, but it's a really awesome database client. Um, Number one is because it gives you it's kind of like a universal database client that works the same regardless of the database or very similar. So like you can use SQLite or Postgres, or eventually they're going to add support for Mongo and probably DynamoDB. And so all your queries are going to be basically this. It's a similar um, thing across all the databases. And then you have a schema file that you can define the same, like your tables and your attributes on your tables. So that's super nice. And then it has a built-in migration, so you can easily migrate your database based on your schema. And then another big feature is that it's fully typed, and so it generates full TypeScript types for your entire schema, so all your models and the attributes on those. And then so like if you make a query to say get user where ID is 1, and the result of that is going to be typed. And then if you include, let's say with that user, I want to also get all the posts that belong to that user, then the result of that is going to be properly typed. And so then, like especially here in a Blitz app, those types flow all the way from the database all the way to the front end.
Hmm.
So it's
So
super nice.
yeah. So Prisma, so you would use like Prisma as an interface or like a database abstraction right now. Maybe it's only MySQL and or SQLite and um, I'm blanking on the
SQLite, Postgres, and MySQL.
okay. So you would be able to use this as like your database abstraction for any of those, and then eventually, like as they add more, you just use it regardless of what database you're using.
Yeah.
Okay. And it so it doesn't provide a GraphQL layer at all.
No.
Interesting.
So the Nexus is created by Prisma, and that's a GraphQL thing, and it interfaces really nicely with Prisma. So
Hmm.
you can do basically like with one line, when you hook Prisma with Nexjs, with one line of code, you can generate all the CRUD operations for your GraphQL API for a single model.
Okay.
And so there's a nice integration there. But then you can fully customize it. So like that's the difference between Hasura, where you can't override the default resolvers. You have to add new things. But
Okay.
with Nexjs, you can still get a lot of the code generation benefits, but
And then
with the
override.
ability to fully customize it all.
Okay. Sweet. And these are like Hasura and Prisma are both ones I hear about all the time, and I've never fully like just taken the time to like understand them individually. So that's actually really helpful for me.
Yeah.
Comment from Todd Libby, definitely going to give this a look. He just spun it up on his machine and he'll play around with it. He's got to head out. See you, Todd. Thanks for coming. But at least you got one convert today from the stream to be able to check it out, which is good.
Woo!
So I think we've got we did that generation or that scaffolding, which did several things we talked about. It built a couple of these queries. It built mutations, all that stuff to do basically like CRUD stuff. Did the model and stubbed out the pages. All that stuff is really cool. The last thing,
Did you run Blitz.js migrate?
That's what I was about to say. Do you want to? I'm going to run that, and then do you want to just kind of mention for people that are maybe new to like Ruby on Rails or never seen this before, like what that's actually doing?
Yeah. So with Prisma, it's migrating your database. So you added a model, which is going to add a table to your database. So you actually have to say, hey, I want to migrate the database. That's going to update your database, and it's also going to generate the Prisma client, regenerate it, so that all the TypeScript types now include the project type.
Okay, sweet. And these, so it's asking me for a name. This is like arbitrary, right?
Just
Like I just call
anything.
this. Yeah. Okay.
Just hit
So
enter.
adding project. Oh, you can enter it. Not plural. Oh, random question. So I did a stream with Redwood.js and was going through their scaffolding stuff, and I wanted to do the idea of like Pokemon, and it broke. And the reason is that some of their automated tooling to pluralize words didn't know how to pluralize Pokemon. Do you know, like, I'm assuming like you probably use you probably use like some sort of pluralize function behind the scenes too.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried doing this with Pokemon?
No, I haven't.
give it a shot and see if it handles it gracefully or not. Because it was kind of a fun debugging experience, and I think it was a good like learning on both ends. But it shut everything down because it just didn't know what to do with Pokemon.
Oh, funny.
Yeah. All right, so I think that's good. So now I should be able to run Blitz start again, and that'll get everything back up and running.
Correct.
I'm thinking I've had this idea for an app that I've mentioned to a few people to build, unfortunately, like by Christmas time, and I don't know if I'll actually do it or not. But like this might be enough of a reason to just start here with all the stuff that's built in and help jumpstart that process.
Yeah, for sure.
Databricks is saying common pluralizing issue with Rails as well. Those are always funny. And I would have thought like for that library, I would have thought if it didn't know what to do, like when in doubt, just add an S, and like it may look odd, but at least it wouldn't fail. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what library they're using
Yeah.
or what library we're using either. I think in our case it should just basically pass it through. Like the routes may not be exactly right or something,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think it should totally fail. But
Yeah.
who knows?
I wonder if they've gotten in the bug fix for that so far. And Databricks says in Rails you can specify what the plural version is. It looks like to fix that problem.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Let's see.
And in our case, in Rails has a bunch of automatic stuff that kind of depends on that. But in Blitz, it's just the code generation. Like there's no runtime pluralization stuff, and so it's less of a big of a deal here because you could manually fix it if you need.
Okay. Cool. Is this? I think again, this is my computer being super slow with all the sending stuff up to the cloud or to the world on Twitch, and then like pulling stuff down as I'm watching as well. So we'll give this a second to load. Has anyone? I'm curious if anyone in the chat has anyone given Blitz a shot yet? Todd said he at least set it up while we were talking and is going to play around with it later. I'm curious if anybody's actually given it a go. I think, my computer's being terribly slow. And I don't want that to look like it's Blitz's fault because it's not.
It's fine. There's
Unicode.
probably some optimizations we should do too.
um,
That is a Next.js thing that I think they're aware of and working on. So just reload the page again, and that error should go away. It's an occasional error that
okay,
sometimes comes from Next.
works for me. So it kept my session. So I got logged in again, which is cool. And then what I should be able to do is go to the projects tab. And by the way, you got a couple of one comment from Taylor Johnson saying that he's going to give this a shot later on. So there's number 2. So comment in the chat if you're going to try this out later on because you see how awesome it is in the stream. So I've got the index page for projects. That's one of those pages that was created. I've got a link here to go to a new page, I imagine. So project/new. And I guess this is you're not showing you're not stubbing out a form yet. You're kind of putting in placeholders for us to go and fill out the form. But then also if I submit, it will go ahead and populate this with it says my name, like that's the name of the project. So it's populating that with some dummy data just to help kind of facilitate this process. And then we can go in and add our forms in after.
Yeah. We'll eventually make this a lot smarter. Like we could add in, because it, like based on what you generated it with a name. And right now the name is just hard coded. So if you didn't add the name, this would break. So
Okay.
we'll improve that. But for now and then the other thing we're doing is adding custom template ability to add custom templates, which a lot of times, like with Rails, it has this nice code scaffolding stuff, but it mainly stays in the realm of demos and prototypes because it doesn't have like all the code you need for a real app.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it's the same case here, but we're adding custom templates so that you can override the default templates and then even add new ones that are set up exactly like you need for your project. So once you kind of figure out your default, like every page is going to look similar like this, you can set that as your template, and then it makes you a lot more productive on your day-to-day work.
Sweet. Nice. Cool. So with this project that I just added, I could go and edit. This will take me to a stubbed out edit page. I mean, like people have probably seen this before. So again, I need to fill out this form, but it at least shows me what's there. Then I go back to like the projects list. Now I can see that thing in there. You get a comment from Taylor Johnson. Very interested to see how sessions are handled underneath the hood. Very impressive if Blitz is taking care of managing all of that for us, which seems like it is. Anything you want to like add on like how session stuff works behind the scenes?
So we use cookie-based sessions. Right now we use opaque tokens that are stored in the database. So this is like how traditional Rails does it.
Mm.
And we're going to be adding a JWT option too, for kind of
Cool.
a bit more advanced functionality if you need. But yeah, it's all taken care of for you seamlessly, including CSRF, anti-CSRF protection,
Cool.
and we have a Passport.js adapter, which allows you to easily plug in any existing Passport.js strategy, or almost any. If there's something that doesn't work, we can add support for that. But like you can easily add Auth0, you can easily add GitHub authentication, Twitter authentication, any type of OAuth or et cetera. And that uses the Blitz session management, but it uses a third party for like the actual identity verification. And so that's like, it's so easy that
Yeah.
people are commenting and be like, what
What
else
am
do
I
I need
supposed
to
to do?
do?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, nothing.
That's it. No, you're good. Just save your time. You got a wow from Taylor Johnson. But this is like, to me, that's the beauty of all this stuff, and that's why this stuff should exist, because there's no need to do it over and over again. A shout out to Rhoda. Thanks for the follow. Thanks for being here and hanging out. Question from Javakian: how is Blitz different than Couchbase? And I have no idea what Couchbase is. Do you know what it is and how it
I
differs?
think Couchbase is a database, right?
That sounds right to me. This is one of those things that I've like heard of. Couchbase
Couchbase.
versus MongoDB is one of the first things that pulls
Uh,
up.
Yeah, it's a database. So you could use Couchbase as a database in a Blitz app.
But it wouldn't. So like, it's not replacing Blitz. It's just a database that you could
Yeah,
incorporate
it's
into Blitz.
different categories of
Cool.
tools. Yep.
Yep. Makes sense. Um, Swarlo says the ease of use really scares me. And that's like, this is one of the interesting balances as well of like, as a developer, in some ways, I don't want to have to write this stuff. But then also there's like a little bit of uneasiness for people of not necessarily knowing what's going on behind the scenes. And that's where, like, I think frameworks really have to prove themselves by showing that people are using these and scale it in production applications and they're not getting hacked, for example, right? So like you'll have more and more opportunity for people to try this out to prove to them that this thing works, and then the community just kind of grows around it and people believe in it, just like Ruby on Rails did, I think, from the beginning.
Yep. So two points to that. One is that we're built on Next.js, which has been around
Sure.
for 7 years now, I think.
That's
And
crazy, by the
so
way.
that's already like people love it. It's a rock
Yeah.
solid foundation.
Yeah.
And so that like the base is already there of um, it's already been proven.
Yeah.
And then secondly, um, so like one thing with the auth here is if anyone's used Rails, they've used Devise probably
Hmm.
for authentication, and Devise is a hairy ball of wax that it works, but if you need to customize it, override it, it's pretty tricky because there's like a million different configuration options, etc. And so we've taken a different approach to that with Blitz. In Blitz, the actual session management and handling cookies and so forth is built into Blitz, so you don't have to. It's seamless to you, but the actual authentication code, as far as hashing passwords and so forth, that is inside your app. So you own that code. That's not
Mm.
inside the Blitz library. It's in your app right now.
Okay.
And so you can go in and customize. You could switch to a different password hashing thing if you wanted to. Um, like all the login and sign up pages are in your project, so you can totally customize those versus having to like override something or whatever. And so that's one of the things that we've done a bit different than Rails that we think is a better approach for most people.
Cool. I like that. Yeah. You got another question in here from Databricks. Can we easily deploy it serverless, or is it a monolith in the Rails way? I'm hoping, I don't know the answer. I'm hoping you deploy this just like any Next.js app.
Correct. So
Sweet.
good news is you can deploy it serverless or to a server. Like
Oh, cool.
it's amazing. I love having that choice. So you can run it. So it is a monolith. Like you develop it like a monolith. If you deploy it to a server, then yeah, it's going to be like Rails where you have to have load balancers and multiple instances and stuff at some point. Um, but if you deploy it serverless, then every query and mutation will be like has its own serverless function, and so those will scale automatically and independently of the rest of your app.
Sweet. And what is, I've never thought about like, I've never seen deploying. Can you deploy Next.js to like your own regular server? I'm assuming the answer is yes. I've just never actually seen
Yeah,
that
yeah,
done.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so we have people deploying it to render, Blitz apps to render, to Heroku, to AWS.
Cool. And is, so if you deploy this on Vercel, for example, in their free tier, I forget what the number is, but you get like 12 serverless functions, and I'm assuming like you could easily hit
That
that
doesn't
limit.
apply to Next.js.
Oh, it doesn't.
They do some automatic optimization or something. Yeah, and so if you're deploying like a Next.js app or Blitz, then you don't have to worry about that function limit.
What? I had no idea. Wow. That's
Yeah.
very cool. I
It's
did not know that.
when they first implemented that limit, that was not the case,
Okay.
but it is now.
Hmm. I just recorded a video on YouTube, and it was create React app versus Gatsby versus Next. And one of the things I mentioned was to keep an eye out for that limit on serverless functions in Next.js. And no one's called me out yet for for not knowing that that's not a problem. But that's good to know on my side. So next video I do, I'll make sure to articulate that correctly. That's pretty
Yeah.
awesome. Let me, I think so in terms of like CRUD stuff, like we could generate more models and stuff. It's going to do the same type of thing. That's great. Login stuff works. That's super cool. The next thing that you showed off in your video that I'm like really excited about is the idea of like, I don't know if you're branding these as recipes, but you went through and like added Tailwind, and you had a recipe, and if there's a different word, let me know, but had a recipe to like do all the
Recipe.
setup recipe. Okay, cool. to add the configuration files and the packages that you need for Tailwind. And I think in the video you mentioned you're trying to like piggyback on the Gatsby recipes, either like use their existing recipes or like use their recipe model, or like what exactly, how exactly does recipes fit into Blitz?
Sure. So recipes are like a one command way to install any type of code or dependencies into your app. It's really good for setting up any type of third-party library. Um, it can be anything. And eventually, I could see us having a paid marketplace of recipes, so
Yeah.
that you kind of like a paid WordPress plugins. You could you could create a recipe that would have some entire like integration, or you could have a recipe for like Zapier integrations, and I
Yeah.
don't know, all kinds of stuff.
Anything you want, really.
As far as the thing with, as far as the integration with Gatsby, um, as of right now, there's zero integration, and we went ahead and shipped what we have. We built our own custom recipe stuff where you can, so it can actually it does like AST parsing, and you can go in and add code into specific places in your app. Eventually, we might uh, switch over to the Gatsby MDX recipe format,
Yeah.
but we'll see. So
Okay. That'd be cool, just to like kind of keep a similar format that other people are already familiar with, right? Like that's always one of
right,
the niceties. If you're moving people over from something, can they kind of keep some of the things that they're used to? So I think that would be a nice touch. But that's like the idea of recipes is so powerful, and it's the same idea, right? It's the same idea of the scaffolding stuff, but even more powerful, of like, you don't have to do the same thing over and over again. Like it's a pretty standard stuff. Like every time I add Tailwind, for example, to React or Nexjs, I go look up the article and then I follow, because I never remember exactly what I'm supposed to do, and I do it, right? And that's what the recipe would do.
exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what is it? Is the
and then
command just blitz add? Is that how it works?
install.
Blitz install. Okay. Blitz install Tailwind, and then I'll let that run, and then
Yep.
go ahead with what you were saying.
So you're going to have to, the user experience for this thing is pretty rough right now. You have to hit enter about 50 times.
Yeah, I did notice that earlier.
It asks you like, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" So we'll fix that. But just keep hitting enter here, and when it asks you something. Um, so yeah, so somebody mentioned in the chat about Next.js um, examples, Swirlo,
Hmm.
and that, so all the Next.js has probably 100, maybe over 100 examples in the repo of just how to integrate with X. And so all of those can be recipes, Blitz recipes, so that you never have to have like an example integration app. You just run the command and you're off to the races.
That'd be pretty sweet. I didn't actually know about Next.js examples, and I just started kind of working with Next.js like literally a couple weeks ago, so I'm brand new. But I did see that in your recording that you did, and it kind of opened my eyes to be like, oh, there's some stuff out here that I should just go here and find this. And Tailwind was one of those examples,
Yeah.
and that is one that you or the team have converted into this recipe, which just makes it really nice and easy. And yeah, there are a lot of enters that go
Yep.
through this process.
Yep.
You
Yeah. So
gotta
right now we don't have very many recipes. We just have a few. We have Tailwind, Chakra UI,
nice.
render, which is like the file to deploy to render.com,
Okay.
emotion, and maybe something else. So yeah, we'd love people to help contribute recipes and add integrations for your favorite libraries and things.
And what's the best way for people to figure out how that process works?
I think we have some documentation. Let me see quick. If nothing else, you can join the Blitz Slack and be like, hey, um, yeah, we do have a recipe. There's on the Blitz the documentation.
Okay.
There's using recipes and writing recipes, and then yeah, we're happy to answer any questions in Slack.
Cool. Do you want to throw a link to that um in the chat so people can see it?
Yep.
And I think you might have grabbed. I think you put You put the Twitch link
Oops.
in there. Yeah, which is okay.
I think I did.
If you're here and you're not already on the page somehow, then you should definitely head over to the Twitch page. Just a reminder there. You got a question from Sir Myron Davis, which thank you for the follow, by the way, and hanging out with us. Can I use templates to generate code that matches my implementation? I think I know the answer to this, but not sure. So is this going back to the templates
So
that you mentioned earlier?
this would be the custom templates, which we'll be adding soon. We have an open PR for that.
Okay.
And you'll be able to customize the template to match exactly like you want in your application.
And what kind of things would you be customizing specifically in there?
Like if you have a standard layout component you have on every page,
Mm-hmm.
then you can add that to the template. If you have certain headers, footers, certain layouts, certain CSS.
So is this stuff that would get generated in the initial creation of the project or during that like scaffolding when we did the scaffolding
During
of
the scaffolding.
okay.
So let's say for example you have um, like a query. You want to generate a query, and then in every one of your queries you add some extra logging information that we don't have in there by default. And so you could go into the query template, add your log statements that you add for every one, and then when you run Blitz generate query, it'll use your template, and so whatever you've defined in that template will be generated in there.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. And comment in the chat from Javakian that ran npm install and then could not run blitz run. So you'll have to, if you haven't already, you'll have to create a project. So you have to do blitz new and then a project name and then cd into that directory, and it would be blitz start is how to actually start that application.
Yeah, and then if you have some like weird error, you can join the Slack and post in there, or open a GitHub issue too.
How many people are in the
But
Slack,
we
by
haven't
the way?
there's no known issues with that step.
And Javakian
We're
saying,
over 500 people in the Slack,
oh, cool. Wow, that's great.
almost 600.
Yeah. Joaquin saying cannot run blitz new. If you, like I imagine at this point, take a screenshot and grab the text of the output if it gives you an error, and put that as an issue in GitHub, or throw it into the Slack. Sir Myra Davis says sometimes npm install globally of Blitz doesn't work, but yarn global add Blitz always works. That's interesting.
The other thing you can try is npx blitz new.
That's a good idea too. There you go. That way you don't even have to have it installed.
Yeah.
See how long my computer will take to like boot this up again. I might need to look into like getting a more powerful streaming setup. I think my computer is tired.
I think we in our CLI code we're not lazy loading very many things, and we need to do that so that it only loads the code. It only parses the code that you are actually using.
Okay.
Like basically code splitting for the CLI is what we need to do.
Gotcha. Well, for what it's worth, this was like way faster before I actually got on a stream. So I had a very good experience earlier. We got some messages in
Okay, you
here
should be
from
running it.
Tailwind. Yeah. So let's just refresh on projects. I also have had Chrome, for whatever reason, has started freezing on me a lot. I don't know why. I started like disabling a bunch of extensions and stuff and still was having issues. Everything in there looks ready. See, if this were a YouTube video, then I would just splice out all the waiting stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so you could go into your project file and add some Tailwind classes.
See if I can get that to go back home. And I'll grab the index. Is that your, just out of curiosity, is that like your preferred CSS? Is with Tailwind?
Um, I think so. Yeah, the two projects I just started are using Tailwind,
Okay.
and I think it is the best for most people
Yeah.
in most teams. I just retweeted somebody's tweet yesterday, I think it was, and they said, "I don't like Tailwind, but it is definitely the best way to work together with a team."
Okay.
Like it's like as far as the maintenance and everything is pretty nice.
Okay. I just so I'm new to Tailwind too. Like Tailwind and Nexjs are things that I tried out for the first time recently. And the ability to do like your either overrides or just like adding new classes to Tailwind is pretty powerful. And then just
Yeah,
referencing
for sure.
those. So this is not a great example, but here is I added the background red color to this button, and you could go in and go crazy and do um, padding for whatever you want to add. And anyway, so that looks like Tailwind is up and running pretty good. And like, again, I would have gone to a blog post. I would have followed the 6 different steps it takes, but just running that one command, I did have to press enter a bunch, but other than that, like I didn't have to do any work, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Cool. Any like that's the stuff that I wanted to get through. I might, so one, if you're cool with it, I'm gonna post this. I've got a little bit of a backlog, but I'm gonna post this recording to YouTube so that other people can go and see it. And I would like to create like a streamlined
Sure.
video as well of like building something out in Blitz and putting it on my YouTube. So I'll definitely share with you and share with on Twitter and stuff so other people can see it.
Yeah, that'd be
Any
great.
Yeah. Any questions in the chat? Any last things that you want to know? How things are working? What the future of Blitz.js is? Anything like that? Let us know. I'll give you a minute or two for that, and then we'll kind of wrap up. From Carriac. So this is it Robert? Is that what Carriac said his name was? Um, asked, what are you most excited about with the V1 release? Probably just the status of getting to V1.
Yeah, I think the main thing will be just new people using it because there's a lot of
Mm,
people that are excited about Blitz, but they're
yeah.
not even trying it yet until it gets to V1. And so when we say, "Hey, it's V1," it's going to be like, "All right, open
Mhm.
the floodgates."
That'll be, I imagine that'll just be such a good feeling to have like come that far. I think like to have worked on something for so long, 6, 8, 9 months by that point, have so many people involved, having talked about it for so long, and then to be able to like confidently say like, here is this thing, this is what I've been talking about, go out and use it.
Yeah, yeah,
I've got a question. What is I've never used Postgres myself. I imagine you can set it up locally just like you would MongoDB or something. But what's the, like when you deploy this, do different providers have like managed Postgres instances that you can spin up and use?
yeah. So this is a bit of a rough spot right now, especially with serverless.
Mm,
If you deploy, the easiest way is to deploy Blitz to Render or Heroku, and then you can use the database, the built-in database there. And if you deploy to Heroku, then you can have it's a free server and a free database. Where with Render, they don't have a free tier; you have to pay for it.
okay.
But then if you want to deploy serverless, like to Vercel or AWS serverless framework or something, then you need a connection pool in front of your Postgres instance because each serverless function, like you could have 1,000 serverless functions, and so you need 1,000 database connections. Um, and the way you do that is use a connection pool like PG Bouncer, and that'll give you up to 5,000 database connections simultaneously. Where by default Postgres has like 20 or something. Um, so if you deploy to Vercel, right now the easiest way is to host a Postgres database on DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean has a managed Postgres service that has a connection pool there that's super easy to turn on. And then you'll use the connection string for the connection pool instead of the database.
Okay.
Um, but I would love to have, um, I would love for Vercel to add like managed database service where it's tightly integrated, which I don't think they are because they've kind of moved away from full stack and focused on front end now.
Okay.
So I'm super tempted to create a new startup that is basically like Vercel plus managed database plus queuing and background processing, and the ability to bring your own AWS account, so you aren't locked into using this platform. Like Vercel, you're locked into it. You can't like eject to AWS. You just have to go
Hmm.
totally change and deploy AWS.
Okay. So the easiest and also completely free would be going to Heroku, like you said. So and I haven't done the combination of a database and an app with Heroku, but like a database is kind of an add-on that you can add to your app, I guess, or it's like a separate thing that you spin up also.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And we're going to get docs up for Heroku deployment soon, but there's multiple people already doing that.
Okay, cool. And then Carriac, I think is kind of slightly like, I think just setting you up, not being sarcastic, but setting you up for this and knows the answer. But also, if I wanted to start contributing, how could I go about that? And Sir Myron Davis, thank you for
Sure.
responding to that. But Sir Myron Davis added the link to creating your first issue in inside of Blitz. Do you have a link to, like, if people are interested in joining the Slack? Do you have a link to that, or how do they go about joining Slack?
There's the doc page on getting contributing, and then there's the link to this Blitz Slack.
Sweet.
So yeah, we definitely welcome new contributors. We love new contributors. We love contributors in any form of fashion, even if it's just improving the documentation or adding recipes or anything. And then there's a bunch of issues in the repo that are labeled ready to work on. Any
Mm.
of those are open for grabs, and you can just comment on it and be like, hey, I want to work on this, and start working on it. And then we'll assign that to you, and and then people will see that's being worked on. And there's also a few issues with labeled a good first issue, but there's usually not very many because they go pretty quick. Sometimes the good first issues are fixed within an hour of opening them,
Hmm,
so you keep an eye on that.
that's
And
cool.
then also, I'm personally super happy to help you personally with any type of contributing things. Like if you're having trouble opening a PR or stuff, we have some docs on that to help you. There's a link to a video series about contributing to open source, but you can also message me in Slack and be like, if you need any help. So
Sweet. Perfect. I'm going to pay a lot more attention to this going forward. Like this is exactly what I was expecting and like hoping for. And especially having gotten more into Next.js recently, like I'm kind of a little bit more prepared for this than I think I had been before. Cause I'd seen you talk about it. I'd seen other people talk about it. It seemed so cool, but I never really paid attention. So I'm going to pay a lot more attention. I'm going to spend some time like going through more of the docs, hopefully create a video, like I said, like a streamlined video for YouTube, and maybe I'll find some things that I can contribute along the way. But it'll be cool now, like over the next 4 months or so, to kind of see the progress and see some of your updates, and then be ready for V1 come late December, hopefully.
yeah, yeah.